Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. How would you characterize the difference between being Gangnam Style and Gangbuk Style?
Oh, right. Good question. Gangnam, I think, is a completely different city to the rest of Seoul.
These are the two halves of Seoul.
Yeah, right. For me, Gangbuk, the north of Seoul, I mean, it's... you walk around, you can feel history, culture. Whereas Gangnam, it was quickly thrown together for developmental purposes. And even people too have that kind of. There's a very sort of gung-ho, business-driven orientation. Whereas if you come to somewhere like Hongdae, it's not really like that at all. I mean, personally, I'm more Gangbuk style, I would say.
People don't always realize Psy was making fun of Gangnam in some sense, right?
Yeah, lightly. There's a piece in the Atlantic about how it's savage, biting satire. I think that was really overdoing it, but yeah, he was just lightly poking fun at the Gangnam ways, which the showiness and the how can I put it really? I think there's a type of Gangnam guy who likes to drive a nice car and likes to try it on with the girls and pretend he's rich. I mean, I've got friends like that who they're in debt, but I think for me Gangnam Style has an element of debt in it.
Right. More than an element, I would think. Plus, you got to pay for that plastic surgery.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's. I heard. I think I quoted in my book something like 75% of plastic surgery clinics in Seoul are in Gangnam, but only 5% of the population of Seoul is in Gangnam.
Right. It's here in the very Gangbuk style Hongdae we're sitting today in Seoul, South Korea, on Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm speaking with Daniel Tudor, who's the author of two recent books on Korea. First, Korea the Impossible Country, more recently, A Geek in Korea, and he's got a book on North Korea on the way in the future, although since this will air toward the end of the year, is it still in the future? When do you think, what's the timeline on the North Korea book?
Early next year, so it will still just about be in the future.
In the future, perhaps, unless I'm really slow about all this, but... Tell me, you've had some time since The Impossible Country came out. Tell me a little bit about. I'll put it this way: Michael Breen, I was interviewing, who did the book The Koreans, and he had an edition in '98, an edition in 2004. He's working on a new one because he thinks so much has changed in 10 years. Has anything changed? Has anything changed in the 2 years or so since Impossible Country?
Very good question. I think for me, there's a trend towards nostalgia that's emerging in Korea right now, and I didn't capture that in my book when it first came out because at the time I thought there's like a glimmer of this trend, but not enough to really get into in Korea. But now I think it's exploded. I mean, we've got TV drama shows. There's a show called 응답하라, 1997 and 1994. There's been two series of this. They evoke memories of the mid-90s for Koreans who are perhaps my age or a little bit older, and it's part of a whole boom of old music, old fashions, and I think
which would have been unthinkable in Korea a little while ago. Old equaled bad.
Old was bad. I remember I had a mobile phone out on my desk. Sorry, it was in a cafe, and the table in the cafe. And this kid walks past, and oh my, no phone, like an old style phone, and he was only about 2 years old. And I would think, in the past you'd see an old car, and I would see a foreigner driving it, a foreigner behind the wheel.
Because they don't care about anything, foreigners.
Right. I certainly don't.
So we don't care about anything, foreigners.
But old music is a lot of it. So there are bars in Hongdae that are extremely hip.
Now, you probably know the particular bar, but I came to Hongdae to stay at this stretch because I wanted to be near a specific LP bar that's named after a food. Yes, I didn't. Oh, if we're naming it, okay, fair enough. But you know this bar well, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure I do. Yeah. No, and it's. I think it's wonderful that this place has become very fashionable. They play great music, and that's what's so heartening about it for me is that. Frankly, I find K-pop to be bland and dreadful and all the rest of it. And
The best word I heard was from a Korean-American radio guy in the States who just called it gross.
Gross. Okay, fair enough. I interviewed, one of the ex-prime minister under Im Young-bak said it's not music, it's movement. So it's just people just dancing around, and then there's a soundtrack to it that you may choose to ignore.
Right, yeah. I see what you mean. I mean, I heard somebody telling me recently that he saw this K-pop dance instructor telling some people how to dance, and he was saying, remember, all dance comes from the shoulders. I was like, that's the most bizarre way I've ever heard dance described. But then again, it's fairly telling, isn't it? Like, it tells you why it's not what dancing is elsewhere.
Right. It's quite robotic as well. I find it quite scary to see all these people moving completely in unison, no mistakes. But yeah, anyway, so nostalgia, as I was saying, people looking back for the first time, and because Korea's been this very headlong sort of developmental state for the past 50 or so years, with this national narrative of the past is bad, and because of Japanese colonialism, because of the Korean War, because of poverty, people always wanted to look forward and reject things from the past and things that were very Korean. So always about looking towards bigger, richer countries, well, like the US, but also European countries too, with the sense of we have to catch up with these guys. And so finally, I think it's really great that people are looking back and looking at old Korean houses, hanok, and old Korean music and Korean design like bojagi, this kind of stuff, and actually finding something to appreciate in it and to be proud of. And I think that's a really, really good thing for Korea.
In The Impossible Country, I mean, anybody reading that gets the sense that, I mean, it's the thesis of the book. It's an impossible development they've undergone, and they put themselves in an impossible situation. Their lives are kind of unworkable, and it's made them unhappy because of all that. But you came to Korea first at one of its happiest moments, right? 2002, the World Cup. So how quickly did that happiness sort of dissipate, and how quickly did the country show its true colors to you in terms of how unhappy people can be here?
Wow. The World Cup was a very special time, and I think even then I realized, well, this is not necessarily normal and natural for Korea. I think when I first came back here, I taught English for almost a year in Hagwon, as a private language institute, in a place called Apgujeong, which is
where I was staying in the last few weeks, in fact, where the plastic surgery mile.
Right. It's the center of plastic surgery boom, I guess. But yeah, they also have a lot of English language schools there, because English is the obsession, and if your parents have money, they will force you to study English endlessly and pay for very expensive lessons.
To be fair, passing English tests is the obsession.
Right. It's not about actually speaking English. Yeah. It's about passing English tests. So I worked in this hagwon, and you get kids who, I mean, materially, their lives are just unimaginably fantastic, and they arrive in Bentleys. The driver comes, picks them up, drops them off in a Bentley. They have all these brand name luxury clothes and bags and everything, and they're just crying. They're so miserable because they're study machines. There's nothing. There's nothing else in their life really, and their school friends, the people in their class, are not their friends. They're competitors. So they want to be their friends, but their parents and teachers force them to be competitors.
It's something I keep thinking when I see these kids who are in Hagwon till midnight. I just want to be like visiting the Soviet Union in the 80s. Like, in the rest of the world, you don't have to stand in this bread line. Like, you don't have to apply to the government to breathe air. Why? They have to know that this isn't going on anywhere else. Why does it persist in the face of that?
I think everyone knows it's problematic. I think perhaps some of the older generations still believe that this is the way to get ahead, and I think because in the beginning it was the way to get ahead. When Korea was not I hate the phrase knowledge economy, I find that cheesy, but when it was just a matter of cramming information, being technically skilled at something, and working your ass off, then that was a good orientation, I think, for Korea to have. But
how do you get those bridges built somehow?
Right. But now Korea obviously is beyond that stage. But I think many of the older generation, they still have this mentality and this developmentalist way of thinking. and those people are still in charge of society, of course. Now, I think that a lot of the 30s, 40s, this kind of generation, they know, but it's very hard. I mean, if you're the mother of one of these kids in Apgujeong or Gangnam somewhere, then perhaps you would like to take your kid out of this environment, out of these after-school schools, but the other parents will talk about you, or the other mothers will talk about you, or you may feel somehow at the back of your mind, I'm going to disadvantage my child by doing this, and they're not going to get all these A's, and they're not going to go to Harvard or Sky or wherever. And so even though they know, logically, I think it's so difficult to be the one to...
No one wants to be the first out of the pool.
Yeah, right.
Now, I was having this conversation, I guess it turned into a bit of an argument with a few foreigners and a few Koreans a few weeks ago, and it was my contention that with the sort of coming generation of international Koreans, and you know this better than I do, they're getting better at English, they're getting more experienced in the world, they're getting more aware of what's outside Korea. With that must, to my mind, come a reduction of this terrible lifestyle, like this system where you're expected to be in Hagwon till midnight, and then you work like you're in the equivalent of Hagwon till midnight when you grow up, working at Samsung or wherever. That seems plausible to me. It didn't seem necessarily plausible to everybody. Like, no, if everybody who's in Korea, they're going to have, that social pressure will keep this persisting forever, maybe, or a very long time. What do you think about that? Is it too optimistic?
I mean, even now I see people who are more, I don't know, we may say aware, or people around this area, Hongdae, who are more inclined to not be bothered with all this high-pressure stuff. People who are extremely smart, but are like, no, I don't want to work for Samsung or whatever. I want to write a novel or be an indie musician or open a cafe or something. And we're getting more and more of those kind of people. But I think the going abroad thing, I think often going abroad is just a matter of getting an education, which will help you to come back to Korea and jump the queue. So if you've been to Harvard or somewhere, it's not necessarily for a cultural experience. It's so you can have been to Harvard. Right. And so people, I mean, not everyone, but I would say a significant proportion of these students who go over to go to elite, usually American universities, they'll go there. All their friends will be Korean, and then they'll come back as soon as they graduate.
In a way, they never left Korea.
Yeah, and they'll take an elite position within Korean society soon enough. But they're still, as though they hadn't gone anywhere. But often the most progressive Koreans I find are ones who haven't been away.
Really?
Yeah.
What is it about their situation that makes them more progressive then, if not being away from Korea?
I think in the case of people who do go away, there's often they're sent by their parents to get this fantastic education, and so there's an expectation upon them to be like a success in business or a good like chaebol guy, something like that, or work for a bank, and so those are the more conservative elements, if you like. Whereas, I mean, these days, when you're getting, how can I say? It's more likely that the people who are not so success-driven and result-driven are the ones who wouldn't bother with that kind of stuff and would just stay here and do something they wanted to do.
Although you could do it here, it's possible.
Yeah. Or if those people do go abroad, they may just go backpacking and bumming around the world. And
the ones in Laos.
Yeah. So if you want the cool Koreans, don't go to my country or your country. Go to Southeast Asia somewhere.
Yeah. Yes, and do that. You'll find the true, in a sense, the ones who are truly free. But I get the sense that you've been received a bit as the man who dares to criticize certain things about Korea, or dares to reveal the unhappiness, or dares to criticize Korean beer. But the Koreans know all this. Like, you're saying things Koreans know very well, but they're very happy, I find, with my Korean friends. They're happy that you said it. They're happy that a foreigner said it. Why do you think that is?
I think perhaps the older generation here doesn't really listen when young Koreans are like, oh, but we're so miserable and we're working so hard, and she's like, oh, shut up.
You don't have to listen to a younger person here.
But I think it's kind of sad, but there's an element in which, like, if you're a Westerner, if you wrote for the Economist or some fancy paper or whatever,
to name one example of a fancy paper,
then people here listen to you, whether you deserve it or not. And so it's I don't know. Maybe if people feel, oh, this person is giving us a voice, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a overly, I don't know, grandiose way of putting it. But I think maybe it makes people feel validated if this foreigner is saying it, even though they shouldn't. I mean, my opinion is not more valid than anybody else's. But also, I think sometimes in Korea you can't. I mean, for me to criticize Korean beer, I think it's the kind of thing that people would do in a bar. Like, oh, this beer sucks, I hate it.
It's well, a great place to criticize a beer.
Yeah. But nobody would go on TV and do it because they'd be afraid of being sued or whatever.
Yes, the libel laws are like you can't. Yeah, now that I think about it, I heard a lot of stories. People would not. People, writing reviews very carefully so that they don't get sued because they said their food was cold. Saying that a beer sucks is actually a legitimate risk. Like, how much of this was in your mind? Like, I'd better get ready for a lawsuit from Cass or whatever.
Well,
did you not name a beer brand? Just Korean beers.
I named the two main. I think it was a long time ago now. I think I named the two main brands, but I didn't identify one of the two in particular as being bad or. So there's, I suppose, potential for worming one's way out of it. But yeah, I mean, as a foreigner, you get away with these things more, I think, especially in the international press, because actually Mike Breen, I mean, he was sued by Samsung for making some satirical comments in a column, and that became an issue beyond Korea. And then I think they realized that this is counterproductive. It's embarrassing for us to be suing this guy.
We don't look good doing this.
Right. So sometimes as a foreigner you get more leeway that Koreans wouldn't have. And so, I mean, if I criticize Samsung, I mean, I don't just do it for the hell of it. But, if I criticize chaebol, misbehavior, corruption, criminality, or if I criticize a particular company, I would probably get away with it, actually. Whereas a Korean journalist would never... If you wrote for 중앙일보, you would never dream of doing a big slam on Samsung in your article. It wouldn't get printed.
How long a road was it from criticizing Korean beer to opening the pub of which you are the co-founder, the booth?
It took about 6 months altogether. I mean, during the interview process for the article, I came to think, wow, this is cool. This is really interesting. I thought it was the start of something. In Korea, when something reaches like that tipping point, another phrase I don't like, but anyway, a tipping point, everyone goes for it. And it's such an exciting thing to see, and to be part of it would be 100 times more exciting. And, not just financially, but just to be involved in some kind of change. And the way it feels, beer has been just this, it's just almost impossible to comprehend how this system has existed for 50 years. I mean, from the beginning, chaebols were encouraged to export, but beer somehow was a different thing. So,
hot stuff is not going to export well.
Right. I mean, if you're Samsung, you from the beginning, you've been told by Park Chung-hee or whoever, you make this and you export it, and everything's going to be great. And so they had to produce good quality. Whereas beer was like it was a walled garden, and really were able to get away with just no innovation, no competition on taste or price for so long. And I wanted to be part of this change. And so anyway, I sat on it for a few months, and then a friend of a friend came up to me and said, "Do you want to start a bar together?" I said, "Oh, okay, go on." And then it just mushroomed, really. I didn't have any pretensions of it being a big business or planning for beer domination or anything, but it's done better than we expected. So no, it started as a hobby for me, I guess, and then it became a proper thing.
What do you have to do to get good beer into Korea? Is there some loophole you have to work through, or is it simpler than that?
No, I mean, the law changed recently. Up until this year, you had to be able to store 100,000 liters of beer, which is it's colossal.
It just says you have to be a chaebol,
right.
Essentially. That's what that means.
Exactly, yeah. And so there were only 4 licensed breweries in the whole of Korea, and one of them made Cass, one of them made Height, and then there were 2 other just... wow, what are these guys doing? But one of them was making for us, so we gave them our recipe and they're making for us. And that's still the case. But now the law's changed, thanks to a member of the National Assembly called Hongdae. He introduced this bill to get rid of this limit and also reduce some of the taxes on ingredients. And so now it's more of a free-for-all. It's becoming a free-for-all. And so I think it will just inevitably change now. I mean, like makgeolli used to be a closed thing, and now everywhere you go, you get makgeolli.
Yes, it's mostly what I've been drinking.
That's right, and you get great variation by city, by village, even. Yeah, it's amazing.
There's this sense of like when a law like that law about how much beer you have to have on premises when the world sees that, they're a little like, what? I mean, that seems like corrupt.
Yeah,
or,
right.
There's this process that's happened over the past few decades of Korean-only practices getting exposed to the air of the outside world, like, the belief.
The thing is, the beer law actually was a Japanese colonial law.
Interesting.
And the Japanese introduced that.
It's just a holdover.
Right. And it's just existed from all this time. I mean, there's a lot of protectionist stuff done from the days of Park Chung-hee onwards, but it's a Japanese law. And the funny thing is, the Japanese themselves got rid of that in Japan 20 years ago, and since then they've had a blossoming of amazing beer culture.
They really have. So why is the belief in fan death so persistent?
Oh, the thing is, I don't.
I'm laughing at that all the time.
I don't really know many people who believe in that.
Yeah.
Or I've spoken to a few people who will say, well,
you get
I don't believe in it, but maybe just to make sure.
I hear that, like, well, it's happened sometimes. Maybe, and I've heard one girl the other night. I mean, this was already a few beers into the evening, but she was like, I think it happens if you're really, really, really drunk and you're in a room that's really, really, really small and everything is closed and the fan is on. And she was describing like you're probably dying from hypothermia. It's not fan death. Like the fan's cooling you down.
Something.
Yeah, I know. It's so there's that, and there's this. It's been fascinating to watch, as I'm sure you know, sort of what happens when these things that have been only in Korea get exposed now that there's so much interest in Korea. And there's sides to this, like, in international talks, like for a while there, Korea, because of, I guess, what you maybe would call the debate style or the conversational logical style of Korea, like Korea would look nuts sometimes at international talks because it wouldn't be about making an argument. They like, you can't pound your fist on the table. You know what I mean? Like, what gets revealed with this whole process, this kind of grand process of, I mean, I would imagine there's a certain.
North Korea is interesting in terms of this. I think, a lot of the rhetoric and the slamming of the fist on the table that comes out of North Korea, I think a lot of that is just trying to save face or just trying to, they feel they've been insulted by somebody, so you have to just fire something back.
Yeah, the slamming of the fist is more northern.
We'll turn Seoul into a sea of fire. I mean, they don't mean it. They just feel the need to say that.
Right.
And so the sooner we accept that, the better, I think.
Right. With the South, it's more like, it's not fist slamming. Yeah, it's like, it's okay to not necessarily make sense. Do you know what I mean? To not make perfect logical sense, but it's more like if the sort of feelings behind what you're saying are true, that got exported to the international scene for a while. I assume it's probably gone away by now because that doesn't play in the wider world, right?
Right. The funny thing is that I find myself influenced by it, though. I appreciate emotionalism a lot more since I started living here, and in some way, if I meet fellow Western friends, like Brits or whatever, these guys are cold and too logical, and I mean, maybe you're technically right, but come on, guys, that kind of.
Yeah. That's true. Only come on, guys worked at the UN, But it's what's fascinating about all this is, I guess, the way that Korea has reacted to interest being on it. So, what sort of a process do you see there? Do you see, like, when Japan, as you've written before yourself, China's kind of the big story now, Japan was before. Japan turned outward, and to the best of my experience and knowledge of Japan, never really got less Japanese. They took on Western things, but, like, converted them into Japanese things. Like English. English may not be great here, but they're not speaking English. They're speaking Japanese with, like, English words.
That,
But do you see Korea remaining Korean in the same way, or is there a genuine Westernization?
I mean, I think, to be honest, I'd quite like Korea to preserve its Koreanness in the way that Japan has preserved its Japaneseness, but I think Korea is somewhat different. And the way that people take to English, and the way that people, particularly, I feel, this may upset a few people, but it's kind of this spineless love of America, and anything American, just follow it. I mean,
It's
yeah.
like following your father because he's your father. Like, it's not because America is necessarily great, but it's in the position of America.
Korea's always, not always, but back in the Joseon era, China was Big Brother, and if you had a scholar, you send them to China to study, and there's the script comes from China, a lot of cultural influence from China, and I think China has just in some way been replaced by the US as the predominant power of today, and who knows, maybe we'll become China again. but yeah. Whereas I think Japan is more willing to say, well, we'll do business with you, but basically we're Japanese and that's it.
There's twice as many of us as in Korea, so we can do business with each other if need be.
Well, I mean, and Japan is probably, historically had a much more secure position, and Korea has not had a secure position, mainly because of Japan. But
Fair enough, and I wonder. Korea, it seems so important to Korea's own narrative, to the culture's narrative, that Korea be weak. Or in a position of weakness. Korea's getting strong.
Right.
Do you think they're entirely comfortable with that position of strength? Can they handle being a strong country, given that weakness has been so central?
Right. That's the thing. And even though Korea is getting stronger, people still say, oh, we're a small country, we're a poor country, and we're divided, well, which is true, divided country, surrounded by big, powerful nations, and I think it's a narrative that I find it increasingly annoying and false. But if it helps people, then maybe it's useful. And I think in times of trouble, this kind of we're a weak nation that's been bullied, we have to unite, that kind of thing is actually very useful for Korea in some way.
But at a certain point, it comes up against reality. I mean, even for them, it will, right?
And if you go to, Vietnam, I mean, Korean soldiers did some terrible things in the Vietnam War. And even now, you've got Korean firms in places like Cambodia who are quite involved with the security forces there in putting down trade union protests, and there have been some pretty brutal practices. And so there are many instances now around the world in which the Korean side is the powerful side, and I think people need to realize that. Korea is not just the bullied country anymore. Right. It can be a bully itself.
Right. People know that. Koreans don't necessarily know it. I mean, we mentioned The Economist, which, of course, you were the correspondent for here for a few years, and that got you writing about Korea. It's a paper that newspaper as they insist on calling themselves, that every few years I go through like binges of reading it, off and on, but I always really enjoy it. What is it actually like to write for The Economist?
I mean, it's very... The editor is king, and there's an Economist style, there's a way of writing, so you're confined to a certain way of writing. To the extent to which you can, you follow that style, and then if there's 10% missing in terms of style, then by the time it comes out, the editor will have tweaked it to have become economisty.
What's a signature of economistiness?
Short sentences, pithy short sentences with a sort of wry or dry, humorous cynicism, I would say.
It's interesting that you say cynicism, because I don't know much about the inner workings, but when I've come into contact with people who do know a little bit about it, they always say, well, you wrote for them a few years ago, which it's a pretty young age to be writing for a magazine of that tone, but then people keep saying, I've heard this over and over again, if you knew how young the people writing that magazine were.
There was that big slam on The Economist. I forgot who wrote it, but somebody wrote this big article saying The Economist...
I didn't see that. What was it about?
It was a few years ago. It was more than 10 years ago, I think. It was, if you knew... exactly what you said. If you knew...
So is that true? Is it very young people driven?
I don't know. I mean, I did my internship there in the London office, and it was all ages, really. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a particularly young group.
What did you write about? What were some of the...
North Korea, and sometimes North Korea.
So if we really break it down, like the articles on the South numbered on one hand, essentially?
No, I wouldn't get that far, but yeah, I did get kind of tired of North Korea. I mean,
3/4 of it on the North, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. And also they have a very specific line on the North Korea, which is everything involving North Korea is very, very bad. Which, fine, you can say that, but I don't know what it adds to our understanding of things. Making jokes about Kim Jong-un being fat. I mean, you don't do that about Angela Merkel or something.
Yeah, there is that element of it's entertaining. But that's not the Economist. That's kind of the British press, right?
Yeah, right. We all do it. Yeah, I mean, the Economist is like the best of. I mean, you should see the Daily Mail.
Yes. Yeah. My God. Yeah. It's there's a tonal difference. It sometimes hits Americans kind of the wrong way. I've always liked how the Economist does it, but I don't really understand the Daily Mail. It's true. You have to be from England, I think, to really engage with that. But what about the press in South Korea? I mean, is there any of that winking? Is there any of that knowingness here, or is it pretty earnest?
No, I think South Korean press is very straight. I mean, there's a huge political bias, of course, across the board. But
is it acknowledged? Like in America, we know which way the wind is blowing with our news sources.
Yeah.
It's almost you're back around to objectivity because you know exactly where everybody stands. Is it the same here?
I would say newspapers, yes, and internet media, yes. TV is a funny one because something like KBS is ostensibly neutral NBC, but really there's political influence from the government. The top people at KBS, they're political appointees, really. And so if you look at some of the coverage, MBC, the other, well, this is a quasi-state-owned broadcaster, NBC. I was in a bar with a friend, and NBC was on in the background, and there's a special news broadcast about this. Is it this nuclear security summit? Yeah, that's the one. And now, nuclear security summit isn't really a big deal. I know the British Prime Minister David Cameron, he goes to it, but it's not a big deal in the British press. It's not, David Cameron is at the nuclear security summit. But here, NBC had this big 1 hour special, Park Chung-hee giving a speech, nuclear security summit. They're playing this sort of patriotic, grand-sounding music at the beginning. They've got Park Chung-hee's face in a big graphic above the presenters, and it looked like this is dictatorship news.
Yes. You mentioned in the new book, A Geek in Korea, you say, in some ways, this still seems like Park Chung-hee's country, the dictator who developed South Korea to a large extent and whose daughter is president now. But, I mean, aside from that obvious point, I have similar moments where I just imagine his ghost sort of frowning. Like on the internet, if you go to the wrong Korea-related site, you get that warning. Like, you can't look at this. I guess it says the wrong thing about North Korea on there. Or, what are these moments you have where you just picture, him or another dictator? You feel like they still have a little bit of a grasp.
I think the way it's very hard in the media to criticize chaebol as well, and there's a Park Chung-hee system.
The chaebol alone, his very existence makes you feel every day like you can use only Samsung products today and be okay. Maybe it's true for the other ones too, but that doesn't happen in a non-Park Chung-hee raised country.
Right. And I think even in politics, there's still this culture of sort of clientism or paternalism. You have like the big man politics, if you like, or big woman politics right now. And even Kim Dae-jung, ironically, the democracy guy. He was the big man of his party, and everyone follows him, and there's that kind of mood in politics, rather than loyalty to an idea or an ideology. Perhaps there's loyalty to groups
or individuals, even.
Yeah.
It's like, I think of it in contrast to American politics. In America, people will vote for terrible people who happen to say the right things. Here they'll vote for terrible things said by the right people. Does that make sense to you?
Perhaps, although the last election, they were all saying lovely things and didn't deliver any of them. Developmentalism, Park Chung-hee is still with us. If you look around Seoul, the mayor, the current mayor, not the current mayor, but the previous mayor, very big projects. Rebuild the city hall, build floating islands in the Han River, redevelop and build higher and bigger. And that mentality is, I think, directly from Park Chung-hee. And I think it's very hard for people to get out of that. And the construction industry is obviously so powerful here anyway. But there's this attitude of newer, bigger, faster, and I think that's a result of Park Chung-hee.
It seems like, well, first of all, I'll ask this. It seems like the current mayor of Seoul has made a show of being against all projects. Is that a backlash? Is he representing a backlash to these decades?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think it's important to say that developmentalism and the Park Chung-hee way of doing things, well, I think it was right for its time. And so often I get people say, "Oh, you're like some big lefty who hates Park Chung-hee," and no, I just don't think it's applicable to today's Korea.
Right.
And so I think the current mayor is correct in that sense. Seoul, should naturally shrink a little bit anyway. We're getting this huge baby boom generation. People were born around 1960. They're retiring very soon. In Korea, they're forced to retire early anyway, which is
crazy. It's a bit of an early age to be retiring, 54.
Yeah. But it's the way it is here. And you've got, let's say you've got kids at university, you've got to pay loads of money. You've got no money now because you just lost your job. But you've got this apartment that's worth like $1 million, so you're going to sell it and probably move out.
Probably going to start a fried chicken shop.
Well, yeah. Or maybe you'll go back to your hometown. I'm thinking that's going to be the thing. And people are having fewer kids as well.
Sort of a redisbursement out to the Gohyang from Seoul.
Right. So I think there'll be a de-Seoulification of Korea. So to persist in this, skyscraper. We've got something like the second tallest building in the world, or second tallest building in Asia, being developed by Lotte right now, 123-story building.
Oh, I've seen that. And it's like a third of the way up, right?
Yeah,
it's
it just
maybe
seems to
halfway.
be against all reason, and the Air Force hates it because it's in their flight path. Local residents hate it. There's sinkholes appearing all around. There've been accidents, all kinds of trouble.
I've heard it described as a showpiece. They're building it so that they can then be contracted by China to build like buildings over there.
It could be the case. There's some people who say it's the chairman is really old and he wants something really amazing before his last kind of
Building himself a gravestone.
Well, a very big one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's. I don't want to psychoanalyze the guy. So sorry. But yeah, the mayor of Seoul. He has a very different way of seeing things, and his whole philosophy is about little people, shall we say. There's a word in Korea, homin, like the sort of the literally the little person, I suppose. And everything is about bottom up and community, and so he's just very fundamentally against big projects, I think, and he would rather find a new use for an old building than build a new building. And I have to say, I think it's a more reasonable way of doing things right now for Korea.
And this idea of de-Seoulification, we're sitting in Seoul. It's a very exciting city. I just came back from Busan, a city that we both like. It's the second city over on the other side of the country, on the coast by Japan. But it's regarded as if it were the 100th city down, essentially, in some way by Koreans. Seoul is... Koreans seem to think it's where it's at because it's where things are generally at. But do you think at what point did the concentration in Seoul become too much?
Wow. The population of Seoul in 1960 or 61 when Park Chung-hee took over was, I think, between 1 and 2 million, I think, something like that. But it was certainly not a mega city. And then just over time with development, you've ended up with half the population in or around Seoul. When is too much? I don't know. Now is too much for sure.
What tells you that it's too much now?
When you get the train out of Seoul to some faraway city like Busan or Gwangju, you just see that there's almost nothing in between. Or there's just a lot of fields and nothing, and little country towns that are full of old people but no young people. And we're not far away from North Korea. If anything ever did happen, I don't think it will, but if anything ever did happen, it would make more sense to have things a bit more spread out, I think. Also, it can be somewhat stressful to live here.
It doesn't feel like it's an absolute crush of people here like it would be in some Chinese cities. Okay. It feels even like it's not, I don't know, it feels... you can tell me, this is what essentially I'm asking you, is how quickly does that wear on you? Because it's pretty exciting when here for brief periods, but how quickly does a number of people, because it doesn't feel like I'm impeded by crowds or what have you know what I mean? But the fact of so many people here, when does it become a problem?
Hot weather. I feel the need to get out of here every 1 or 2 months, maybe just for a weekend, something like that, and decompress. In certain areas, just shockingly crowded.
I guess you go to like Myeongdong, but that's a lot of non-Koreans as well. It's just people that are flying into there from everywhere.
No, absolutely. I mean, Chinese tourism now is astonishing, and that's really the last 5 years or so. I think it's really taken off. You used to get a lot of Japanese tourists. Now it's very, very Chinese, and that's changing the Seoul economy in some ways, and definitely the tourist industry here. I mean, you're having hotels that are constructed just because of this Chinese tourism boom, and big shops that just sell makeup for Chinese tourists because they've seen some Korean TV shows with girls wearing this particular kind of makeup. And I think tourist industry is actually a not necessarily a savior, but it's very useful for Korea right now as we're moving into this era where Korea is a high-wage, high-cost economy. You can't necessarily manufacture widgets and compete with Vietnam. I think you have to. That's a choice that Korea will face. Actually, I think. Do you step up in terms of manufacturing? Do you try to become like Switzerland or Germany, or do you become like, say, Britain and try and be a service economy? I would say the first would be a much better choice. But in any case, the tourist industry is very, very useful for Korea right now.
That analogy to Britain, it brings to mind conversations I've had with a fair few English people here, which is, it seems like a non-intuitive comparison, but we mentioned Park Chung-hee, and I always think, for a while there at the beginning when I first started meeting Koreans, I would always wonder, why do you have such strong feelings about Park Chung-hee, for or against?
You didn't say Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, the same. I would ask the same thing about from Englishmen, like why. I think that a non-English person can never really understand the degree of either hatred or love for Margaret Thatcher an English person might have. Politics seem identity related in a way that they maybe are less so in every place outside England, especially in the case of Margaret Thatcher. But it seems like, I always ask in the Thatcher conversations, like, who would you have put in the office? Like, it doesn't seem like there were many viable alternatives around. And they say the same thing about Park Chung-hee, like, who was going to fill that void but Park Chung-hee? Like, they both feel like they were inevitable, even if you hate both of them. It's like, what else was going to happen, right?
Or maybe if you turn the clock back to 1961 or 1979, there would have been something that seemed, like an alternative, but just with hindsight, it becomes, it's the Thatcher era or it's the Park Chung-hee era. In the case of Korea, there was a coalition government at the time that. Sometimes people who really hate Park Chung-hee will say, that coalition government had an economic plan, and if only they'd been given a chance, blah, 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 maybe. I mean, I'm not sure that would have happened, really, but the country was a pretty chaotic place back then, by all accounts. Thatcher, you can draw parallels, but Thatcher was a genuine free marketer, and Park Chung-hee was not.
Certainly, but not being that was sort of a plank of him developing the country, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't say that as being praise or criticism for either. Park Chung-hee, I think, was the person for the time. And again, I don't think his developmentalist way is right for Korea now, but I think it was reasonable for the time. Whereas in the case of Thatcher, I think. Short term, what she did has the appearance of being successful, and the salvation of the UK economy, because the UK economy was a mess. But in the long run, I think what it has done is imbalance the economy in terms of now we're a service economy. We don't manufacture. We don't have manufacturing jobs, and also imbalance the country towards London, away from the regions. So if you go to London, if you meet people who are slightly well-to-do or more, Margaret Thatcher is the saviour. She's wonderful. And if you go to regions, particularly up north where I'm from, if you go to a town where people used to have jobs but no longer do, then she's the wicked witch of the South.
Indeed. And I wouldn't compare these two I wouldn't compare their actions in office, but it's more what brought them to power. Just the countries were in such a state. Like, this is what happens when your country is enough of a mess. And I mean, I don't know about anybody who wants to go to the era right before Thatcher came to power. Nobody really wants to go to the 70s in England. But so these.
There's a lot of great music at the time.
Yeah, I guess we have that. That's fair enough. But there was a lot of great music in the 70s in Korea as well, right, as we know.
Yeah, there was, and unfortunately Park Chung-hee stamped all over it.
Right. Not a fan of rock and roll. Park Chung-hee.
What thing is, like, he banned marijuana here because of pressure from the US, and it's quite interesting that now the US is moving in the other direction, whereas Korea is very much still with that marijuana is evil. And
yeah, there's a certain. I'll illustrate this. I'll illustrate this question with this anecdote. There was a Korean American guy I met in Los Angeles who was interviewing me on the radio, and he'd come back to the homeland for a bit to live. He was in Seoul for a while. He worked a radio job here, and his Korean boss, was always like, "Mike, this is a conservative country. Don't talk about sex. Don't talk about drugs. This is a conservative country. Just keep it straight, keep it clean." And then after work every day, "Come on, Mike, let's get some hookers." Like, they would go to the brothel.
That's the thing. This is not a conservative country, but it's got a conservative veneer. Like, as long as you don't talk about it or people don't know about it, then you can do anything you want.
Yes. So it's not at its heart conservative, but it is possible. You have to seem conservative, though.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
It's one of the contradictions here. Another one would be, I don't know if it's a contradiction, but you've written about what you call the natural socialism of Koreans, how they instinctively share with each other, if they're in their, like, group, if they're in some sort of, if there's the weakest possible tie, will then, you're in. Like, Koreans will do a lot for each other if they're only, like, somebody graduated from the same college as you a decade before. In America, you don't care. It means nothing. Yeah, it's like, yeah, great. I mean, I almost want to see them less because it's like, okay. But here, someday, they're practically on their knees, just with their hands in prayer that they've met their technical predecessor at school, somebody who happened to come before them. But that, it makes this place both the most capitalistic country I've been to and the most socialistic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does, yeah. I'm not sure there's Hongdae culture or the Jong culture as well. I'm not sure they condition capitalism. I feel that the capitalism is a product of developmentalism and this rush, and materialism. Materialism is very, very strong here, and I think that's the result of rapid development. Probably countries that experience rapid growth, like China, Russia in the 2000s, the oil boom.
Post-war America.
Well, yeah, you have this great consumerism and desire to show more and make more to buy more. But in terms of this natural socialism, there's a sense in which if you have a connection with someone, then you ought to help that person, and they ought to help you. And I think when you get into politics, when you look at how politicians behave, or top civil servants and top business people with politicians and civil servants, it obviously creates very bad incentives. But just among the general population, and just in my own life as well, it's one of the most beautiful aspects of being here. People genuinely will help you.
It's I increasingly believe it's the only kind of socialism that can work. You can't force people to be the way Koreans are.
Right. And there's a great thing that there's a guy called Peter Underwood who I totally recommend you talk to at some point. He's the fourth generation of this missionary family that's been in Korea for ages and ages. And he said if Adam Smith had been Korean, The Wealth of Nations would be a completely different book. I think it's true. In terms of what guides people's economic actions, maybe in a place like Britain, you may think it's, you calculate how much you're likely to earn from this transaction. Is it worth it to you? Okay, I'll do it, or I won't do it. Whereas in Korea, you might, I don't want to do it. It doesn't make sense to do it, but I have to do it because, he's my brother. That kind of feeling.
Yeah, and there's some sense that they're not just that. If it's your brother, you're also
literally my brother.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that.
Brother, quote unquote brother.
Someone I'm close to. Yeah.
If they're in that position relative to you, they'll do the same for you, though.
Yeah, right,
so
right,
it's,
right.
there's a calculation could
you
work.
Say there's a long term, but I think the feeling around it is more than that.
Right. You can't really quantify
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I think that maybe perhaps a British economist or like a Western economist in the sort of the traditional, or the neoclassical school would perhaps say that. But I think if you live here, you instinctively feel that it's more than that.
How long did it take before you...
calculation.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these things like that you notice over time. But how long were you here before you realized Korea and the Koreans were different enough from the rest of the world to write a book about?
I always wanted to write a book about it. As soon as I got here, I was just endlessly fascinated with this place.
So at the World Cup, you're like, I think I should write a book about this place.
I remember the thing that struck me the first. I mean, it's not a very important thing, but the sense of what do foreigners think about us, and this obsession with the outside world, and particularly people from so-called advanced countries, which I often write about. My friends and I were walking around, where was it now? Maybe Myeongdong somewhere, and there was actually a street fight. And you never see fights in Korea. I mean, you see them in films in Korea. Every Korean film is full of gangsters fighting each other. But you don't really see many fights on the street, definitely compared to, say, England. And there's these two drunk guys, and there wasn't much of it. I mean, they were pushing each other and trying to aim a few punches, but missing. And there was a big crowd around them. And then somebody said, "Oh, there are foreigners here. Stop what you're doing." And then they're all like, "No, stop. And then the fight stopped because we were there.
I'll see.
Right, I mean, that probably wouldn't happen anymore. That's probably ancient history now. But wow, this place is different.
Yeah. The sense of concern over what foreigners think. I mean, it seems partially like an extension of concern over what other Koreans think as well, but concern over what the foreign world thinks. It's
particularly rich countries,
right.
So-called developed countries, so like the US, Europe.
I've had this conversation with Korean friends where they'll ask me, is anything weird about Korea? Do you find anything sort of uncomfortable or strange? They want to hear, but I have an answer. Yes, the plastic surgery is really weird, but that answer doesn't land right. It's not what they expect. I don't know, yes, the West is weirded out by the plastic surgery. That's bizarre to them, but that, I don't know, maybe they expect me to say the food's too spicy. For some reason,
I think that must be in some school textbooks or something, because that's a universal. I mean, no one likes to, it's not good to generalize, but just I hear that from everyone.
What do you find weird about Korea?
A new person, if we go out to eat, is this too spicy for her?
Yeah,
where are you getting this from?
Yeah, why do you think we can't have...
It must be in a school textbook. It must be like the textbook that everyone learns from.
I was... Well, it's just this kind of thinking. I mean, I was interviewing on the show B.R. Myers, who writes a lot about the North, but he lives in the South, of course, and he was saying he's vegan, which is difficult in Korea, but the common response to that is, but Americans like meat, if they know he's American, which to me, I can't even mentally process that response.
The Koreans do this, Americans do that, and then somebody else does something else, and there is that mentality somewhat here. I mean, often I'll get a journalist now will ask me, can you write a column for us? What do foreigners think about blah blah blah? Or I'll get TV requests. Please give us a quote. As a foreigner, what do you think about? And I always say, well, it's just my opinion. It's not, like Chad and Brad and Tad from Texas.
Three, yeah.
Sorry, those are my stereotypical American names. So my apologies, but.
I know them. We go way back. Someday.
But yeah, they may well have different opinions.
Right.
But yeah, if I'm always I feel I have to be more cautious about what I say, because I will represent every Westerner, even though I don't want to. And
you're not really safe declaring. There's nothing that foreigners think about Korea or Westerners.
Yes. I just hate to hear it.
I think I'm pretty safe in saying that the West is spooked by the plastic surgery. You think so?
Yeah.
Why do they not? Why are so few Koreans receptive to the idea that the world finds that weird? Do you know what? Have you had these conversations?
I haven't really spoken to people much about the outside reaction to plastic surgery. I mean, most of my Korean friends find it weird, actually.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So it depends on who you're with, generally speaking.
I think so. I mean, if you're with Gangnam people, Gangnam is almost just what you do, I guess. But yeah, I'd say that the general, and if you get out of Seoul as well, and people who are, I mean, you need money to have plastic surgery too, and so if you're talking with just, working class folks who are maybe not from Seoul or maybe from a poorer district of Seoul, they would find it weird as well, I think.
It's another extension of, the whole.
But it's part of competition culture.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Hagwon thing.
Yeah.
It's no one wants to be at a Hagwon.
Yeah.
No one dreams of being at a Hagwon all night. No one dreams of having their chin shaved to the right width. But it seems like not only if I'm going to be living in Korea, not only would I rather not be around that kind of thing, but I can't imagine. Can Korea afford to burn so much energy on internal competition that is meaningless to foreigners, to the rest of the world? It doesn't benefit anybody. It's a reorganization of the hierarchy within Korea, but it's meaningless everywhere else.
It's a very good question. Yeah.
I can't tell who has the eyelid surgery and who doesn't, but they care a lot.
Yeah, but you could say that. To me, it's all part of the same thing. It's about getting a good job at a good company, going to a good university, looking good. To me, it's all part of the same, just competitive stuff. And I think that drive has produced, to some extent, the economic miracle.
Yeah.
Now I would say it's counterproductive. As the economy slows, and opportunities dry up, the pie doesn't increase, so you're fighting for a bigger cut of the same pie, the same size pie, and so that it is now problematic. And I think also people don't know how to cooperate. There's a lot to be gained from. As I'm realizing from my business and from writing a book with a friend, and everything I do, all the projects I'm involved in, I try to involve others and collaborate, and I think you get something that's greater than the sum of its parts if you do it right. But I feel people in Korea have just been inculcated with this idea that you compete. I remember seeing an advert for I think LG were recruiting new staff, and it had a picture of a baby, and it said "Global Challenger." Since you were born, Yeah, I think I took a picture of it and I put it up on Twitter or something. But since you were born, you were a global challenger. I'm pretty sure when I was 2 months old, I was just crying and shitting all the time. I don't think I was challenging on a global scale, Right. But that's the mentality, unfortunately.
You weren't fighting for England, We're here. There's more of a resonance of you're improving the nation. I don't know if there's not a lot of Americans are really. Even not the identification with America is really superficial that Americans have. Maybe they wave the flag occasionally, but it's not like they feel. I think if it came down to it, Americans would know we're not getting together. You know what I mean? I don't know about England, but
I think England is beyond. This is way.
It's unsalvageable at this point.
Yeah, I know. We find you guys to be very wow. These guys love America. But the Korea, I think it takes something negative to bring everyone together, like this economic crisis, 97, 98, or invasion by foreign powers, or anyway, just something unpleasant and threatening from abroad to galvanize everyone. I think that's parts of. How can I say? There's this. I think expression. Yeah, I think it's an Arabic expression, like me against my brother, but me and my brother against my friend. Me and my brother and my friend against the guy down the road, and then it reaches out to the whole country eventually. And I think Korea's a bit like that. And so to unite everyone, you need a foreign enemy.
And I wonder, you say foreign enemy, people outside Korea automatically assume that the North must be their enemy, which they don't think about here. They think they don't care about the North and the South. But you've been working, as you say, with a friend on a book about the North. With all you've learned about the North doing that, what has that cast any light on the South as well? To what extent are they the same people anymore?
Well, I don't get the chance to meet many North Koreans, but the Chung stuff, the culture of sharing and sacrifice for your friend or those who you love, is very strong in both, but stronger in North Korea, I would say.
It seemed to need it more, I would think.
Yeah. And a lot of if you look at the chaebol and then you look at North Korea and how they're run,
is the military their chaebol in a way?
Well, the Kim family is and I think the difference is that Samsung and Hyundai, well, particularly Samsung, financially viable. North Korea isn't financially viable. Yes. I asked, there's a very prominent defector who used to be a poet laureate of North Korea and a propagandist. I asked him, so what's the difference between Samsung and North Korea? And he goes, well, Samsung can give you a job.
Not so for North Korea.
But yeah, there's a paternalistic, top-down organizational structure and way of thinking. It's quite Korean, and that is found in both. I think the extent to which you will be upset when someone offends you. Like North Korea, I mean, all this Sea of Fire stuff again. Often that's just, well, the South Koreans and the Americans are doing some naval exercises. I mean, the Western media never says anything about that. They just, there were some naval exercises. But from the perspective of North Korea, those naval exercises are very, very threatening and scary. And so they like to react to that by firing rockets into the sea or by using very hostile language. And that captures people's attention. While these North Koreans are crazy, well, they're not crazy. They just feel the need to say these things because they feel affronted. And so, let's say, I'm British. If North Korea, or if anyone says something so outlandishly offensive about my country, I just find it amusing.
Yeah, it's not you. It's not the same thing as you.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is a caricaturish almost. But I think in Korea, North and South, there's this. We've been insulted. We cannot have this. There's that mentality.
Right.
Whereas, say like I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but anyway, a British person would just say, "Oh, well, screw you."
Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
Yes. Right. If you're drunk enough, maybe you just need some shoving. I don't know.
Yeah.
If reunification happens tomorrow, how soon before a branch of the booth opens in Pyongyang?
Well, the thing is, they've got better beer up there, so we have to raise our game,
Why is it better? Okay. Just no beer table?
I mean, I do like our beer a lot, actually. But yeah, I mean, the relative discrepancy would be much smaller. I think it's because Kim Jong-il wanted nice beer, and if he wanted something, he got it. So he actually bought up a disused brewery from the UK, all the equipment, and then he got a German guy to come and... So yeah, it's pretty good. It has to be good.
It survives him, this beer.
Yeah. It's good stuff. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had it, but I've had it, and it is good.
Is it available only... Where do you get a North Korean beer?
During the Sunshine Policy days, you could actually buy it in Seoul.
Oh.
But anyway, that's all gone, so not now. But you could get it in China.
So when you go visit the North, which you're preparing to do, you'll be drinking some?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
What do you plan to do in the North when you're up there?
I'm actually giving a talk about business, of all things, because North Korea. I mean, one of the ideas I want to overturn with my book is that North Korea is this communist country. I mean, it is a dictatorship and a very nasty one. But right now, it's very money driven, and nobody is ideologically communist. I think maybe some people in their 80s. But the real communists in North Korea are all very disappointed with how North Korea's turned out.
As anybody would be,
right.
Whatever their ideology.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there's no ideology really that... I mean, I don't know, you could say North Korea is a xenophobic or nationalistic country, extremely nationalistic country, but there's no ideology we would identify with that, that's North Korea. But yeah, sorry, where were we?
We were on the subject of North Korea, but what you plan to do in it?
Oh, right, yeah. So I'm giving a lecture on business with a group called Joseon Exchange, and they try to educate North Korean young entrepreneurs who do exist.
Seems like a contradiction in terms, but
they do exist. But often, unfortunately, they're government insiders. They're people who have a privileged position in North Korean society. So it's not really so much social leveling. But anyway, the idea is just try to get some business and knowledge of business, and also contact with the outside world to try and perhaps soften the place a little bit, I would think, or if we could get a situation where 10 years from now we look back and go, oh, North Korea started to become like China. Well, obviously China is still a dictatorship, but you'd rather live in China than North Korea, right? At least Chinese people are all able to eat.
Yes, true. The air may be bad, but they have food.
Yeah, right. But yeah, their beer is better than South Korean beer.
So finally, given all your time in Korea, what's something that both of our sort of tired homelands could learn from a country that still has as much energy as this one?
Yeah, for me, I think America's also has this positivity, but yeah, Britain, I think
we're looking back in the rearview now, essentially, as England has been doing for a while. But
okay. Well, yeah, Britain, we've always been a little bit cynical. We make everything into a joke, and it's socially a crime almost to be seen being very ambitious or trying something or trying to be different, trying to do something new.
That is a difference from America.
Right. And somebody will always laugh at you, or well, why are you doing that? I mean, come on, mate, that kind of thing. And it was Korea. I mean, if people like you, you know it, and you can do anything. Sometimes we need to just say, I like you, or I love you, you're my friend, or I've got this great idea, let's do this. Sometimes you need that.
Right.
And Korea
start a pizza pub.
Right. Korea has a ton of that. And I feel England doesn't have that.
They lost it or never had it?
Maybe never had it.
I see.
I don't know. I mean, not in my lifetime anyway. But, I like our humor and the way we can turn everything into a wry kind of aside or whatever. But at a certain point, you need to be a little more. Look, this is what we're doing. I've got this great idea or whatever, and people should go, okay, good for you. Rather than good for you.
They wing it a lot here, but they know what they're doing.
Right. And people, still do work very hard and have. I think I always struggle with this. I like social freedom and the idea of people being able to live as they please. And you want to get a tattoo or you want to smoke ganja? Okay, fine, you do it. Whereas in Korea, it's like, what are you doing? But when I look at how a lot of people turn out in England, I think, well, maybe we need a little bit of that. I always think somewhere in between the two is good. Like Korea loosened up a little bit, or my country tightened up a little bit.
I thought the same with America and Korea. Like if you just average these out, we'd be okay. We'd be doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We'd have something really on its feet. We should start a country, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Somehow we can hybridize all three. I've been speaking here with Daniel Tudor. He's the author of 2 books so far on Korea, Korea the Impossible Country, and A Geek in Korea, with a book coming on North Korea as well that he's co-authored. And he's the co-founder of The Booth. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going tomorrow. Very excited to get some pizza, some nice beer and pizza without corn on top here in Seoul. Daniel, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Humberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.